You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Welcome back, and thanks for tuning in again to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, sponsored by Trailtopia Adventure Foods. Just a bit of a warning, I'm in the middle of a Florida thunderstorm. We've got a bit of a lull, so I'm trying to record this in time. We've hit episode number 90 already, and like last week, our guest is a young lady, Linnea Van Manen, or Shiver. But unlike Kayla, or Popeye, last week, this young lady was a bit younger and went all alone. She did a flip-flop, or OBOer, as I keep trying to call them, and for much of a hike she was very much alone. She was actually just out of high school and had only just turned 17 when she began a hike. As you're going to hear, though, Linnea turns out to be another of these resourceful, wonderfully strong young women who we're all lucky enough to run into on the trail from time to time. Linnea will be here soon.
If I Hit It Again.
I'm back to my class of 2014 and the very friendly Tim McGann, or Tig, or Irish as he became. In fact, his name was one of the things that Tim wanted to talk about. He's going to be along after Linnea. Last, but hopefully not least, we had the third chapter of The Year We Seize the Day by Elizabeth Best and Colin Bowles. In this one, Colin returns to his roots to offer up a bit of language that is best avoided by a beep. You'll know it when you hear it, but I think you might also work out the word that it replaces. I'm trying my hardest here. Don't shoot the piano player. Before we get to all of that, Trailtopia have something to tell you about those days when you struggle through the morning, probably got 10 miles under your belt, and breakfast is a distant memory. It's lunchtime and, you could always have your full Snickers of the day for yet another sugar rush. But sitting there in an empty shelter, protected from the bitter wind, I'm sure you'd really rather have Trailtopia's beef-flavoured ramen noodles with green beans, corn and mushrooms. D-flippin'-licious. And if you need to go without the gluten, all of Trailtopia's ramen noodle lunches and light dinners are available gluten-free. Try Trailtopia Adventure Food, the best of home cooking away from home. So now, from the luxury of a car where we captured a few traffic and movement noises, here's Linnea Van Manen, also known as Shiver. Okay, just to prove that there's not all old people on this show, we've got a very young woman to introduce today. Her name is Linnea Van Manen. Hi, Linnea, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. And you have just done something extraordinary. At the age of 18, what have you just completed?
I just finished my thru-hike of the Appalachian Trail.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing at that age. And I think you were probably only just 17 when you started, weren't you?
Yeah, that's right. I started just a few days after I graduated high school when I was 17, and I had my 18th birthday on the trail.
There's a celebration for you. And I didn't know, and I hadn't followed you, so I tend not to make a habit of following young ladies on the trail. But the reason I reached out to you was that I did see a Facebook post that you were sort of telling your friends that you completed your AT through hike. But then you mentioned that a year before you started hiking, maybe even earlier than that, you were actually in a wheelchair. Tell us about that.
That's right. So I had Lyme disease when I was a kid, and I took antibiotics for it and everything. But it's led to some long-lasting symptoms, which eventually manifested itself to be bursitis in my knees last year. And so last summer, or I'm sorry, not last summer, 2 summers ago, the year before I started my thru hike, I was in a wheelchair. I'm not able to use my knees because of the inflammation.
How were they treating that at the time then, Linnea?
I was taking antibiotics for it.
And what that is supposed to keep the inflammation down, I presume. And it didn't work in your knees.
Yeah, so the antibiotics kill the bacterial infection, but I actually there's not much that you can do to treat bursitis, so all I was able to do was just rest it and use like the rest ice compression elevation technique.
And you did that, and you eventually got out your wheelchair. Obviously, thought it'd be good.
Yeah,
I thought it'd be
yeah.
a good idea to go for a 2,200-mile walk, but we'll come back to that in a minute. So now you've you had you've had Lyme, or you can currently have Lyme. What's the prognosis for your Lyme disease now that you're an adult? Will that go away? Will it get worse? Is there a prognosis,
Um,
or is it always just treatable?
I haven't, got any professionals to tell me that anything about it, but I the way that I understand it is that it should be, I should like continue to experience some symptoms that shouldn't you know knock me off my feet per se.
Right.
Um but as long as I, continue to take care of my body and use it and in the right ways, then I shouldn't be too bad off.
So it manifests itself in different people in different ways, I presume, then, doesn't it?
That's right.
And
Yeah.
it was a knee thing for you. So do you continue to take these antibiotics?
No, not anymore.
Okay, so you're not, so they're not actually treating it anymore then in that case, are they?
That's right. Yeah.
And I've, as I say, I've never studied Lyme, and I've heard about it, and I was lucky enough not to get it when I was on the trail. At one
Right.
stage I did find 5 ticks on me. Did you find ticks on you? And if you were infected again, would that be almost like it makes no difference you'd had Lyme before, or would it make it worse?
I honestly don't know. I only found one tick on me throughout my entire through hike because I sprayed all my clothes and my pack and stuff with permethrin. But um, if I were to get Lyme disease again, I have no idea how it would affect me. I was
So
just so careful not to get it.
I bet you were. I bet you were. God, dear.
Yeah.
So you decided to hit the AT as a young woman. Couple of questions here. Why? Well, first off, why did you decide to hit the AT? What was the thought process there?
It was a bunch of reasons, but the biggest thing was that I really have like a strong love for nature, and I was, just coming out of high school, and I hadn't really had the opportunity to ever complete a goal that was purely for my benefit, that my parents hadn't wanted me to do, or I hadn't done because that's just like what you do in our society. I wanted to do something that was entirely just motivated by my own desires and not really beneficial in any other way, if that makes sense.
It kind of
Um,
does actually, and it's the same sort of thought that a lot of 16, 17, 18-year-olds, I'm sure, have, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. They're getting older, they're starting to think about leaving home, and their parents have always been around, and people tend to try to please their parents. So, and that
yeah.
actually, of course, leads on to the obvious question: what on earth did they think about their 16-year-old daughter, as you were when you were talking about it, getting out of a wheelchair with a bursitis and going on this long walk?
um, they, my mom, I talked about the idea to them. My mom was pretty skeptical. I think they didn't really expect for me to actually go through with it because I started talking about it a year before I wanted to do it, and at that time I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to do it either. So I think that for a while they didn't treat it as a serious thing that I was actually going to do, and then once they realized that I actually was going to do it, um, I was so researched. I
Oh, well,
had spent so much
how did you
time.
do that? Tell us about that. How did you research then?
I just spent hours and hours online and in outdoor gear shops, and just thought of every possible question that I had and looked it up, and I was so excited and so fascinated by it that I enjoyed all the research, and it's the first time for me that I've spent that much time and effort on something and have like maintained a like passion for it as strong as I did with the AT.
So once your parents saw that you were doing all this research, and particularly because they saw you had a passion for the trail, um, how did they react? Were they more assured by this, or were they less assured because they knew you were more likely to do it?
I think in some ways both because they were realizing that it was an actual desire that I was going to try to fulfill, and so that made them probably a little bit more nervous. But also, every time that my mom or dad had a question that they were concerned about, they came to me, and I always had an answer for it because my research had been so thorough.
Yeah.
And so I think that helped soothe their worries.
How did you plan the logistics of it all then? Because this is not a straightforward. You kind of need support, don't you? People sometimes send you packages, and maybe not. But how did you manage this logistically?
The biggest issue with logistics was actually timing because I had to start later than when most people start because I had to finish school.
Of
Um,
course, yeah.
and uh, I also had never been backpacking before, so usually when people have to start later in the year, they'll just go southbound, start at Katahdin, and
Yeah.
go to Georgia. But since I'd never been backpacking before, I was kind of wary of starting with, Katahdin and then the 100-mile wilderness and then, southern Maine. And so
Yeah.
the biggest like logistic planning that I had to do was actually just planning the flip-flop that I did.
Right. So where did you start your flip?
I started in New York and I hiked
Yeah.
north from New York to Maine. And then I got to Maine in September and then turned around, drove back to New York, hiked south from New York to Virginia. And then I took the winter off for
All
about
right.
4 months and then started back down at Georgia in March and then hiked
Wow.
back up to Virginia.
So where was your actual finish then?
It was in Buena Vista, Virginia at
Yeah.
really
Spectacular.
unexciting highway.
Yes, exactly. I know exactly where that is. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
You have to get a lift off the mountain down into Buena Vista, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I
it's
remember
a
that.
it's
I
a
remember that
hard
very well.
ride.
I just said the car next door to you has just moved off, hasn't it? I just
Yeah, they were moving around a lot, but no.
yeah. Just so the listeners know that Linnea is actually recording this in her car.
Yeah.
Hopefully not while she's driving, but she's recording in her car.
No,
So,
I'm not
so
moving right now.
no. So you had a kind of interesting flip flop then. So were you around a bunch of people much of the time, or did you, because of how you were doing it, did you find yourself once you started going south again by yourself? Because I'm sure when you started in New York in September, there were lots of people around who were hiking them, weren't they?
Yeah. I actually started at New York in June,
I'm
and
sorry.
there were lots of people around then. I think I was right in the middle of the bubble of northbounders.
Right.
But yeah, it was kind of interesting because I experienced all different possible, I think, experiences of people that were around me because when I started, I was with the northbound bubble, but they were almost done and they were in the mindset of getting to
Yeah.
Katahdin and getting it done. And so that was interesting to start with that. And then when I flipped back south, I was with southbounders who were, they were at pretty much the exact same place I was, just in the middle, kind of playing the mental game of like getting through Pennsylvania and Maryland and Virginia and all that.
Yeah.
But right before I got off the trail in November to wait out the winter, there were very few people around. I was camping alone at shelters most nights, and I could set up my tent in the shelter to conserve heat because I knew that
Yes.
nobody else was going to be coming around and asking for room.
How do you feel about that?
Hiking alone has its pros and cons, as I'm sure is obvious. It's really nice. One of the things that I really wanted to experience on my thru hike was solitude because I did also have the goal of getting to know myself outside of when I'm just like stripped down to me in the woods by myself,
Sure.
like what I'm like when that happens. But also, it gets really lonely. I started to go kind of crazy, and I think I mentioned I would every time I sneezed, I would thank myself and bless myself. And so
Yep, you're right. It's crazy. Oh, dear me. So, and once you spent, I mean, what was the longest period you were by yourself?
um, I didn't really keep track. But I
But did
think
you go a couple of days without seeing somebody?
yeah, I would definitely go a couple days without meeting any like people, maybe people going the opposite direction, hiking the opposite direction, and but all the interactions that I would have for uh that time would just be passing people, saying hello, and then going our separate ways.
Yeah, yeah. You actually went north on two different sections from New York to Katahdin and then Georgia to Virginia. So you were going north quite a bit of the way anyway.
Right.
Did you find that mindset so different because you did yours over 2 years, but over a year it was 11 months from
Hmm.
beginning to end effectively, but 7 months hiking, as I understand.
Yes.
Did you find that the people you met who had done most of the trail already and were already starting to thinking about finishing, how did you find those people as opposed to the people you met when you started in March the year later, or the next year?
It's actually really interesting. I've thought about that a lot. The people who I met in New York when I started going north were, they were great, and I made like tons of friends, but for the most part, those people had a tendency to be like more jaded. They were definitely leaning more towards the getting it done as fast as
Yeah,
possible than enjoying the views and the rivers and the ponds and all that
yeah,
mindset. And then the people who I hiked with down south, it was really great because I feel like the people that I met in Georgia when I started in March helped me stay away from becoming jaded, because they all had such a energy and
yes,
excitement for all the things that they were seeing, and it was kind of infectious. And so I think
I'm
that
sure.
that helped me stay excited about the trail.
How interested you pretty much hike with people who were not on the same level of you in terms of hiking, haven't you?
Yeah,
Which
pretty
is
much.
yeah. What a different hike, but in many ways, once again, it's a entirely valid hike because you've done it your way as well. And I know you said took 7 months and you enjoyed the experience, but you did find it tough, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. There were a lot of experiences that I had that were trying. Um,
Yeah, I'm going to come back to those in a minute, actually. But yes, so there's obviously one in a minute. But when we did speak about that, one of the things you said, and I wrote it down word for word, you said, "When I look back, I'm not going to wish I'd stopped at fewer waterfalls." So you really took the opportunity to take all the all the views you could and try to enjoy the experience, didn't you?
yeah, I really did. Every time that, it was a really hot day, I would look ahead in my guidebook and try to see if there were any places, any streams that I could go swimming at that day. And
Right.
if I if I knew that I was going to get to a spot that was really like well known for being a beautiful spot, I would try to make sure that I could enjoy my time there and um, arrange it so I was there on a beautiful day or something like that.
And did you get involved in a tramily, a trail family, or from time to time, or was most of your hike by yourself?
I was involved in a bunch of different trampolines, probably like four or five.
Oh,
I
nice.
would I got to meet so many amazing people, and then if I was lucky, I was pretty lucky on my on the first leg of my trip, because I met a group of people who were hiking together who were also flip-flopping, not from the
Right.
same spot that I was, but because they were flip-flopping, we were all kind of, it was easier to hike with them. They weren't as completely surpassing me physically in their ability
Yeah.
as most people were. Um and that was amazing. And then hiking down south in Georgia, I hiked with a group. And when I was going southbound, I hiked with a group of people. And I still keep in contact with most of the people that I hiked
Yeah,
with.
people are so welcoming. You start hiking with somebody, you become friends straight away, don't you? It's a kind of
Yeah,
amazing thing.
yeah,
And so that wasn't your plan. It wasn't your plan to cut it into 2 years. You were going to try to go all the way down to Georgia.
right.
So you were planning. So when did you think you would have got to Georgia had you stayed on the trail and not got off?
My original hope was to finish in November.
All right.
But
Okay.
then I got to November and I still had over 800 miles left.
Oh
And
wow. Yeah.
so then I
Yeah.
thought maybe I can finish by Christmas. Um, which uh did not was which
You
also
did the right
became
thing.
clear that it wasn't going to happen. And
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
just decided, I also didn't know it at the time, but when I got off the trail in November, I checked my bank account for the first time in a while and I had I think $26 left. And so it was really good timing that I
Yeah,
decided to get
excellent
off the
time.
trail. 'Cause I
Well, I was
could-
going to ask you about that because this is not a cheap deal. This is quite expensive, and you mentioned that you're running out of money. Um,
right.
How did you plan for this financially? Did you give yourself an amount of money over a period of time?
So I did some research. I figured out what most people said they used on how much money they used on their through hikes, and then
Mm,
I worked as much as I could while I was in school to try to save up that money.
right.
And I I was nowhere near close when I got to the trail. I had also set up a GoFundMe page, which some friends and friends of my family
Nice.
they donated some money, which was really helpful.
Yeah.
And I was really grateful for that. But yeah, when I left for the trail, I was nowhere near close to my goal
Wow.
financially, and I just I figured I would try it and see how it went. And when I realized I had run out of money, I went home and I was able to save up more than enough to finish the trail this year. So
That's
I was
cool. That's really cool. Yeah. So you've financed it yourself. You've done it yourself, and you're still only 18. I think that's fantastic. I really do. So what impact did the trail and I guess you're getting your hiking legs, the strengthening of your muscles and I guess your joints
Mhm.
have upon you physically? What did it do for you physically?
Well, I am in really great shape. My
Mhm.
calves are bigger than I've ever seen them before. Uh,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I think it definitely made a lot of things on my body stronger. My knees, my muscles. Um, and then there were nights where I would finish hiking for the day, um, and it by looking at what kind of distance I had hiked that day, I could kind of predict which parts of my body would hurt. So if I did uh, under 20-mile day, my feet would be sore and my knees would be sore. And if I did an over 20-mile day, my hips would hurt. Uh, and if I did over 24, then my back would hurt. Uh, um,
So you kind of walked yourself out of most issues then, didn't you? By strengthening yourself, you kept going because I know, as I say, when we spoke earlier, you said you wore knee braces, I think, or leg braces, or knee braces rather, for a while.
yeah, I
But
did. I wore
you
them.
stopped using those, didn't you? So your knees actually strengthened up as well, didn't they?
Yes, they did. They really did. I wore the knee braces for the first 700 miles of my hike, and then I kind of weaned myself off of them because I heard that wearing the braces can actually keep you from getting stronger. And so I
Yeah.
decided to try to get rid of them, and I was able to, which was awesome.
And how was that when you first took them off? Did they feel weaker?
Um, there were some times where I felt like I kind of wanted to put them back on, and I decided not to. And I think that was what helped me get stronger.
Yeah, and looking back on it now, had you and we do another section of the show called "If I Did It Again." I'm not asking you what you would necessarily have changed if you'd done it again, but would you have given yourself a finish other than Buena Vista?
Um, I I got to when I hiked up Katahdin, I hiked up it with uh maybe four friends of mine who were all at the end of their through hike and all were
Yeah.
in the getting to finish right then, and I got to experience it with them. And
Nice.
um that even though I wasn't finishing, that was still a really rewarding experience, and I really was happy for that. And then starting at Springer, I got to experience starting at Springer with a bunch of people. And so even though my endpoint wasn't necessarily magnificent or spectacular, it was I don't have regret over it at all.
Oh, that's great. I think that's a great answer. I really like that. And the fact that you could share it with some friends as well and feel their joy as well, even though
Yeah.
you had, lots of miles to go. I think that's a really good attitude. And I've heard much worse attitudes than that, let me tell you. Including mine, by the way, my own. Now I know that you had a few injuries and illnesses on the trail. What happened in terms of your injuries and illnesses?
Well, a bunch of stuff happened. I fell a couple times. One time I fell in Georgia and bashed my shin, and I still have a lump that is tender to
Wow.
touch. It was about 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And I got poison ivy in my bloodstream my first week on the trail. I
Nice.
got a fungus infection from swimming in the Housatonic River. So to anybody who's thinking about doing that when they're hiking through Connecticut, I advise not doing it. And I got I got mild hypothermia and frostbite on Mount Madison in New Hampshire
Wow.
in the White Mountains. Um,
So, was that because you didn't have enough warm weather gear or because it was so darn cold or you just didn't put it on in time?
Both. I was underprepared for sure. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I left underestimating the power of the weather that
Yeah.
morning from camp, and it was 90-mile-an-hour winds with 12 degrees wind chill and
Wow.
10-foot visibility, and it was sleeting, and it was just it took forever to walk across the top of the mountain. Even though it was only, I think, 3 miles, it took about 2 hours. And
Mm.
when I had left that morning, I had no idea, so I was just wearing my rain jacket and a tank top and
Oh,
like
God.
a pair of like
Mm.
spandex pants. And so I actually had to get help from someone else that I was hiking
Wow.
with who
What happened? What happened?
he was a trained Alaskan wilderness first responder. And so he was kind of the
Alright.
best person to have around.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But he realized he noticed the signs of hypothermia in me, and he ended up he force fed me a Cliff Bar and helped me get my layers on because my fingers were so cold that I couldn't
Wow.
even put my clothes on, and helped he put like my socks on my hands because I didn't even have gloves,
Oh, my gosh.
and then just kind of stayed with me and made sure that I got off the mountain okay. And
Wow.
when I got down, it was so crazy because it was this horrible, worst weather I'd experienced in my entire life on top of the mountain. But the minute I got below the tree line, it was a beautiful sunny day.
I know the feeling. You know what that is? That is the trail provides,
Yep.
isn't it? You were hiking with the perfect person who could look after you. But that is
Yes,
just
exactly.
it happens all the time, doesn't it? Absolutely
Yes.
amazing. Now, the other question, you told me about you saw a bunch of animals. You also had a kind of frightening moose encounter, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yeah. I was hiking through the 100-mile wilderness, and I think I was listening to a podcast. And so I wasn't really listening to my surroundings. I wasn't as aware as I could have been. And I looked up, and there was a moose charging me, a moose and her baby. Um, and I just froze. I was, if she had actually had the intention of hurting me, she definitely would have been able to, because I did not think fast enough.
Wow.
But
She just pulled up?
yeah, at the very last second, probably about 2 feet in front of me, she just ran off the trail and into the woods, and her baby followed. But that was just, I had to just
Wow.
stop for a minute. I wasn't able to hike for a little while after that, because I was just thinking about how I had almost died. Uh,
Yeah, I think I'd be changing my pants at the time, actually, if that ever happened to me, I'll tell you. God, dear, you're lucky there, because I'm
yes,
told they do kind of follow through on these charges
yeah,
sometimes. So you were
I
real
was
lucky.
really lucky.
Now something else which I've wondered whether or not to bring this up, but I think we want to tell your story as fully as possible.
Hmm.
You did have another encounter with a human animal. You said you're happy to talk about it.
Yes.
A person. Could you tell us about that?
So the first night that I was camping alone, I had been on trail for about a week, and I had actually just had to get off trail to heal from the poison ivy. And
Yeah.
it was my first night back on trail after that. And I was camping alone, and I was about 2 miles from a road, and I was lying in my tent, and I also did not yet have a sleeping bag. So I didn't have the rain fly on my tent, and I was sleeping in my tent without a sleeping bag. And
Huh.
I woke up in the after many hours of darkness. I woke up to a man standing over my tent, shining a light onto my face and trying to wake me up.
Wow.
And I screamed, obviously, because that was a startling situation. And I
Yeah.
said, "What do you want?" And he said, "Are you camping here?" And I felt like that was kind of an obvious
Yeah.
answer, because I was
Somewhat
asleep in
redundant
a
question,
tent.
yeah. Yeah.
But I said yes, and he said, "Do you want to come sleep at my house?" And I declined, and then he persisted in asking me to come to his house, and I told him that even though I was camping alone, I told him that I was actually waiting for my boyfriend to come, and he should be there any minute to meet me there. And the guy said, "Oh, well, do you want to wait for him at my house?" And I said, "No, thank you. I have pepper spray. Good night. Please leave." And
Wow.
eventually he left, and that was the end of it. But it was really, it shook me. I wasn't able to sleep at all that night. I ended up getting up at 4 in
I'm
the
sure.
morning and packing up all my stuff and leaving, because I was afraid that he would come back in the morning. And I wasn't able to camp alone for a long time after that.
So did that, to be honest with you, being having the potential dangers of the trail brought home to you and not suffering any bad consequences is not a bad thing.
Right.
At the same time, it's a horrible thing to experience. Did you have any impact upon you on how you behave for the rest of your hike?
I was definitely really cautious about making sure that I was in a safe situation as much as possible. As long as it was under my control, I put myself into situations where I felt comfortable, and I avoided
Sure.
ones where I didn't. Um, and you know, it also changed how I felt, because a lot of people, when they heard that I was a 17-year-old girl when I left, going to
Sure.
hike in the woods alone for a long time, a lot of people were, you know, under the impression that I shouldn't do that because I was a young girl by myself. And the way that I looked at it was, I was either going to go do that or I was going to start college. And the Appalachian Trail has a lot lower rate of violence and crime than a college campus does. And so that's kind of
Right.
what and I still feel that way. After
Yeah.
that happened, though, I did realize that even though the rate's a lot lower, it's still possible. And even though I
Yeah.
am in a place where most of the people who are around me are going to have my back and are, very kind strangers, there are going to be some people who are not that way. And so I should just be
Yeah.
at attention and make sure that I'm, not doing anything stupid.
Yeah. I think it's a really sensible approach, and I'm so glad it ended fine for you because, and I wouldn't want people to take away the impression this is majority of the times this
Right.
is such a safe environment to be in generally,
Yeah.
and you exercise obviously some judgment, but at the same time you handle yourself really well by the sound of things, especially getting a torch shone in your face, nightmare. Now, I know that you moved out of home very recently. Did the trail give you a confidence that may have been missing to do this, or was the move always in your plans?
The trail definitely helped me become confident in the fact that I could, you know, just take care of myself that way.
Cool. I'm pleased. I'm pleased for you. And you're going to college in August, aren't you? Are
Yeah.
you already missing the trail, or
Oh yeah. I mean,
is that because you haven't been off it very long now, have you? You only
yeah.
finished last a couple of days ago, didn't you?
Yeah. I think it was about 2 weeks ago that I
Oh,
finished,
2 weeks.
and
All right. Yeah.
yeah. I'm definitely still in the phase where where I'm still getting used to having
Shells.
accessibility to showers and air conditioning and
Yeah.
stuff, and so it's still like really nice to have those things, but I know because I did miss the trail so much last winter when I had to get off. I know that that's going to be
I'm
coming
sure.
around soon, so hopefully college and moving into there and all this stuff that I have that I'm excited for in my life right now should be a good distraction from that.
Yeah, and will you be doing any other long distance trails in the future, or is this something that you've started now that you think you're one and done, or do you think you're going to look at some other
I
trails?
have a bucket list in my head. I haven't actually written it
Good
down,
girl.
but it's so long. I can't I
Good
can't
girl.
list off all the trails that I want to do at one time because I can't even remember them all at once.
A good thing for you, Linnea, though, because you're so young. You've
Yeah.
got lots of years to do your bucket list.
Yeah.
I started my bucket list in my 60s. Stupid time to start a bucket list. So I'm really pleased that you're doing this. Well,
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming having a chat with us, Linnea, and sitting in your car outside the library. And I appreciate that as well. And I'm so glad that story, which could have not been nice, ended well enough for you to make you safe.
Yeah, me too.
And I appreciate you coming along.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me.
Not at all. Lovely to talk to you.
Yeah,
And perhaps if you do another trail, you'll give me a shout and we can record something about that as well.
definitely.
Okay. All the best then. Bye.
Bye.
Isn't she something? She was well researched, and her responses, to my ears at least, were mature and often thoughtful. I particularly thought that she dealt with that creep really well. She was firm and let him know that she wasn't going to go down without a fight. I think if I had a daughter, or in my case, a granddaughter of Linnea's age, I'd probably have been terrified if she'd come back and told me that. But she was relaxed enough to talk about it, and that's why we decided to include it. And nothing seemed to put her off her stride. Not fungus, not poison ivy, not a charging moose, not even mild hypothermia. Nothing. She'd been in a wheelchair a year before, yet she did it, almost by herself, over an 11-month stretch and 7 months of hiking. Marvellous. I know how I always go on about finishing at Katahdin, but I thought she gave a wonderful answer about finishing at, of all places, Buena Vista. What a great girl. We have a couple of very short 5-star reviews to share with you. Caretaker, brackets, medic, close brackets, says, "Great job, my favourite podcast. Great conversations and info. Thanks, Caretaker, brackets, medic, close brackets." Beau Cantrell, now that is a name, says, "Hands down, my favourite podcast. I could not agree more, Beau." So, on to
If I hit it again.
and Tim McGann, a man who had to assume a couple of identities. It's Tim. Okay, we're back with Tim McGann. Hi, Tim. How are you?
Doing well, Steve. Thanks for having me back.
And just to prove I'm not as stupid as I look, I remember your trail name is Tadgh, I think, which is Tig.
Tadhg.
Oh, HG. I am as stupid as I look, obviously. I can't even read it. but I know it's Tig. I know it's Tig. Now, you know what this is about? This is about things you might change were you ever to go back and do the trail again. Because like me, you and I were out on the AT 4 years ago, right now. Have the intervening years made you think, if only I'd done this, or maybe if I'd done that, what might you consider doing differently?
Well, for one, and a perfect example is my trail name. So it was commonly misspelled, commonly misspoke.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great idea going into the trail,
Yeah.
but nobody was able to remember it. Nobody at all was able to remember it, and it got frustrating sometimes. I was just frustrated that I had to explain it every time. And then at the end of me explaining how to say it, they'd say, "Well, what's your name again?"
Oh, dude.
So yeah, and I actually changed my trail name halfway up the trail, which I didn't realize is a no-go. Like, it's just, it's got kind of put like a bad vibe on things. But I changed my trail name to Irish like halfway up the trail just because nobody was able to remember Tig. And then I changed it to Irish, and then all of a sudden everybody's able to remember me.
Yeah, well, isn't that always the way, that sort of thing? Oh, dear me. It's funny, actually, the trail names don't you think the trail names are quite important? And the reason I say that is that a lot of people I met on the trail still think of me as Mighty Blue because they didn't know me as Steve. A lot of the other people obviously know me as Steve. But, if you've met me as Mighty Blue, that's who I am. And if I've met you as, Shivering Whimper or whatever the name might be, that's how I remember you as well. And I seem to remember, actually, I seem to remember you telling me you were Irish. You called yourself Irish. So perhaps I bumped into you once when you were trying out that name as well.
Yeah, it just worked out so much better. And I'm telling you, Steve, every single time I said my name, it turned into a 5-minute conversation. And then, no joke, a couple minutes later, they forgot what my name was.
But don't you think that to a degree, it's the trail names actually started conversations, didn't they? And those conversations often led to other things. So they were, to me, it's a wonderful idea that people get trail names. And actually, I was talking to a lady I'm following, Jessica Mills, Dixie, on another trail right now. And she said they don't seem to use the trail names as much on the PCT and the CDT as they did on the AT. So
that's what I've
interesting.
Heard.
Yeah, that's strange.
That's what I've heard.
So what other things? Were you a tenter or hammocker, or did you stay in the shelter most of the times?
I was tent. Yeah, I stayed away from the shelters. I was a tenter. I had the Big Agnes Fly Creek 2. Wouldn't change anything about my sleeping arrangements. Everything was set up perfectly. I had 2 jackets that were, in hindsight, way too heavy. So if I were to do it again, I definitely would have cut a little bit of that weight out, and I just would have spent a little bit more money and just got a lightweight jacket. What
was your weight at Springer when you started?
35 pounds.
Oh, that's not too bad. Well, I was 42, and actually, when I got bitten by a dog and I went back home for 7 days, I dropped 7 pounds in weight that I was taking with me, which stuff I'd never used on the trail. 7 pounds of it, which is just ridiculous. Yeah, I'm sure people these days are going, getting down so low, it makes it almost a breeze to carry a pack, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, those jackets, I had 2 of them, and it was a luxury to have both of them. But if I were to do it again, I would have suffered a little bit and just cut out on the weight.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I'm thinking of trying to go again next year, and I'm really going to strip down what I take to stuff I really, really need. I know that I had way too much in my pack that I didn't really need. Did you? And the other thing I've been thinking of, did you have a stove or did you eat cold?
I had a jet boil.
Oh, so did I. Yeah. Would you take another one of those?
Jet boil worked perfectly. Absolutely. I love the jet boil. And the fuel, if you use it sparingly, it can last longer than you think. The alcohol stoves are great, but they can be tough to get going sometimes, especially when you're in the mountains.
Yeah. What about the time you left? Were you happy with that? When you went, did you go in March?
Yeah, I left on St. Patrick's Day on March 17th.
Wow, you went after me. They went before me, rather.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm thinking next year going March the 1st. I know they've had a tough winter this year. I can't believe it can be as bad next year. So
yeah,
I could regret saying that, but we'll see how that goes. Yeah.
To be honest, there wasn't really much that I would have changed. I was really happy, with my hike. I mean, there were little things, that we discussed. I would have spent more time getting to know people. Out there. Cause I was, when I was just, I was doing my thing. I had a goal set in mind and I just went for it. I
Yeah.
probably would have took the foot off the gas a little bit and just kind of, spent more time getting to know some people.
Did you do side trails? That you had the chance sometimes to see a vista, say, is it the top of Mount Rogers? That's about a half mile out of your way. For me, half a mile was way too much to go out of my way to see a view.
Well, I went up to Mount Rogers. Weatherman and I went up to Mount Rogers, and I was pretty disappointed, especially that it was a half mile out of the way. I mean, it's the highest point in Virginia, I believe.
Yeah.
But it was a little disappointing.
It's funny, actually, because now you told me that, I definitely won't be going there if I try again next year.
There's no view. It's just there's a little medallion in a rock, and it's just top of the trees.
And the other thing I was thinking of, and as I say, this is so in my mind right now about thinking about going again. Would you ever consider finishing anywhere other than Katahdin? In other words, going from south to north?
No, yeah, and you know what? Before we spoke, I thought about it. And I mean, Katahdin is just, it's an epic ending, compared to Springer Mountain. It's just the excitement and the 100-mile wilderness in Maine, being the final state. It's just, it's awesome, hiking northbound.
I do agree with that, but I'm very much along I certainly understand the rationale that the ATC are trying to push what they call flip-flops, which I'm now calling OBOers. Out, back, and out again.
Okay.
Those flip-flops. But I suppose there are a number of different ways you can do it. One of the guys I've been following, a pal of mine, went earlier this year. He's off the trail now, but he's going to go back again. He's going to do a kind of flip-flop, but he says he's going to try to make it so he ends at McAfee Knob. That would be cool, I think.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, and I think if you do that, it's almost the second best of Katahdin. I can't imagine going up that scrubby path at Springer is the way forward certainly wouldn't be the way forward for me, because Katahdin was that. And also, you went up to Katahdin, of course, with your wife, which must have been lovely for you as well.
Oh, that was amazing. I mean, Maine's just a beautiful place.
Oh, yeah.
It was a beautiful ending to an amazing journey. I mean, one benefit of going southbound is just there's a lot less people. So if you wanted to stay away from the people.
Yeah. But I would think, though, and I've thought about this several times, I did consider the prospect of southbound, but I know that I was only ready for New Hampshire and Maine once I'd done nearly 2,000 miles. I would never have been ready for Katahdin and Maine and New Hampshire at the beginning. I mean, I was stopping every 20 yards, as it were, for the first 200 miles in Georgia. So I would have had a nightmare if I just tried to do Katahdin. It would have taken me 4 days to do Katahdin, I reckon. It would have been absolutely awful. So have you considered doing any more hikes, or are you a one and done now?
No, I would love to. It's, after hiking the trail, it definitely, planted a long distance hiking seed. Right. Unfortunately, it's something, that I'll have to put off until I'm in a better situation. For now, that was a once, and hopefully I can, quit out on life for another, 6 to 8 months and do another one. But I would love to.
I think it speaks doesn't that speak to taking the opportunity when it's there? You obviously had the opportunity to do it when you did, and you took it. And people have the opportunity quite often, and they just choose not to take it, don't they?
Yeah, before I started, I couldn't stop thinking about, 20, 30 years down the road, looking back and saying, why didn't I do that while I had the chance? That was something that was haunting me that I didn't want to happen.
Yeah, damn right. I mean, trust me, and being 20, 30 years down the road myself, I'm glad I took the opportunity when I did, even though I was 61. I miss the trail every single day, probably because I'm involved with the podcast and writing and stuff. But I'm sure you do as well. I bet you think about it every single day, don't you?
You know what? A day has not, and I can say this 100% confidence. There hasn't been a day that's passed in the last 4 years that I haven't thought about it. It's pretty wild.
It really is. Okay, mate. Well, I'm glad you wouldn't change too much. Makes me laugh that you would change your name, though. and it's been lovely to catch up with you again. And hopefully we're going to catch up again soon, because I remember laughing with you a couple of times.
Absolutely. Be great to catch up with you, Steve. Great talking to you again.
Take it easy, mate. Bye.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
What a top bloke Tim is. That's a kind of Brit expression for a really good guy. I noticed that he reached out to class of 2018 hikers this week on Facebook to offer them assistance when they get in his area. There is such a fraternity there that once you're in it, the grip never loosens on you. Good for you, Tim. Now, episode number 3 of The Year We Seize the Day, where Ellie starts to go a little bit downhill with her health in those first few days. I asked permission of the two riders as to whether or not they minded me beeping out the, let's say, less user-friendly words. Ellie was fine, and when I told Colin that I hadn't had to beep anything in the first 2 chapters, he simply wrote back that he'd better rewrite it. Still, there are 2 beeps here, so perhaps he was just warming up. I'll see you all next week. Chapter 3, Day 2, Zubiri to Villava. Colin, feeling like death by the afternoon. We set off next morning in a mist of rain. It's a cool grey dawn, the air heavy with the smell of wet hay and pollution from the magnesite factory that is the only reason for Zubiri's existence. Today is even harder than the first. The adrenaline has been burned off, and all that remains is the lactic acid that settles like salt into leather. I can feel every muscle and tendon in my legs. Ellie, I notice, is not in good shape. She has been throwing up all night, or so I find out from other pilgrims. I snored through it all, apparently. We cross a river and follow the blue and yellow Peregrino sign that marks the path of the Camino here in the region of Navarre. On the other side of a medieval stone bridge that pilgrims have trod for 6 centuries is a bright red Coke vending machine. I imagine pilgrims from the 15th century stopping here for effervescent sweetened drinks. It encourages me to go on. My backpack is heavier than it was yesterday. It felt like a rabbit in a sack in Roncesvalles. Now it feels like a large, wet bag of cement that's bending my spine out of shape, like a stick of licorice with a potato tied to the end. I'm sure every time I turn my back, some bastard slips some brick in the pack. I begin to suspect that we were not as severe with our packing as we might have been. The Trangia camping stove now feels like a real stove. What can I say? It seemed like a good idea at the time. Today, there's no geography teacher to hurl the Trangia on the ground and tell me to wake up to myself. On this walk, as in life, I'm on my own, and any weight I have to carry alone. In the next village, we stop for a coffee and find our friend Victor, the Swede, already sitting in front of the television with a café con leche, coffee with milk, and toast, waiting for the 8 a.m. running of the bulls from Pamplona. His mother was Swedish, but his father was from Pamplona, and he loves to watch the encierro, as the Spanish call it. Have you ever run? Ellie asks him. Many times. I don't like bullfighting, but the running is different. The bull does not get hurt. It's the man that gets hurt if he is unlucky, if he makes a mistake. A mistake? To me, it looks like volunteering to stand in front of a machine gun. If it gets pointed at you, you get mown down. But Victor shakes his head. My father ran every year. He still does, when my mother lets him. He taught me how to do it. He walked the course with me, showed me which sections to run, the sections where it was not so dangerous, where you had a place to shelter if the bull came too close. The worst place is near the end of the run, at the entrance to the Plaza del Toros. Here you have nowhere to go if the bull hunts you. If the bull hunts you? Sounds brilliant. There are important things to remember. If you go down, you must stay down. Stay down and do not move. Some instinct will make the bull jump over you. But if you get up, he lowers his horns and puts you down again. The ones who get hurt are mostly foreigners. The Spanish know the rules and they respect the bull. He explains what it's like. First, there is the waiting, he says. The waiting brings out something primal in a man, something only a man can understand. There is the fear, the adrenaline, the men slapping their rolled newspapers against their thighs, the same newspapers that carry the body count from the day before, different columns for those injured by hoofs or by horns. When the bulls come, there is an explosion of excitement and terror. His eyes grow bright as he describes it. The fear, he says. This is what the feria is all about. The 2 minutes in the whole day when you discover what it is like to be a man, or crazy, or both. Suddenly he falls silent and his eyes go to the television. The run has started. Every year, Saint-Firmin attracts tourists from all over Europe. You sometimes see the images on the evening news, men dressed in white with red sashes, holding rolled-up newspapers with which to taunt the bulls. Some people say it's not as much the running of the bulls as the chasing of the idiots. The bulls are driven through the narrow, cobbled streets of the old quarter, sliding around the corners like 3-year-olds in an ice rink, slipping on the wet cobblestones and thudding into the wooden barricades. Confused and more than a little pissed off, they occasionally trample over the top of some testosterone-crazed unfortunate, and occasionally a liver or a set of testicles is removed by a stray horn. Which seems to be what has happened right now. At the bar, 2 old men grunt and shake their heads as one of the foreigners goes down, then immediately rises to his knees. This does not mean he is not already badly hurt, Victor says. It's just the adrenaline. As Victor warned, as he gets up, he makes himself a target. He's hit again by a second bull. He bounces over the cobblestones like a rag doll hurled from a train. And then everyone in the bar groans, because he starts to get up again. The third bull hits him while he's still on his knees, and he hurtles back like he's been sprayed with an Uzi machine gun. 3-0 to the bulls. Victor shakes his head. Idiot, he mutters. Probably an American. As the lead bull charges through the street, the runners look like the foam spraying from the bows of a motorboat. If the bulls stay together, Victor says, everything will be okay. If one of these bulls gets separated, he will get confused and start to look for targets. Then it gets really dangerous. And this is just what happens. Outside the entrance to the plaza, one of the bulls decides that a certain Spaniard, lying prostrate on the cobblestones beneath his hooves, is the cause of all its troubles. It galls him not once, but 3 times, finally tossing him aside like a used Kleenex. 30 seconds later, the run is over. Victor grins at me. That was fun. I wonder if the used Kleenex being hurried away on a stretcher by the Spanish paramedics think that was fun. Possibly not. But, as a combat photographer mate of mine used to say, it's only terrible if it happens to you. Colin. Ellie gets a wobble on. We descend into the valley of the Rio Aga. The road takes us down through the pine forests beside cool running streams where Papa Doc Hemingway once fished for trout and where local Basques still do. There are chalets built entirely of stone and white farmhouses called caseríos. This is Euskal Herri, Basque country. I find I have become very conscious of my body as a working piece of machinery. Already the twinge in my lower back that I have had for 10 years has become a steel scalpel softly inserted and then withdrawn with every step. The once interesting clicking of my left knee is a stabbing pain that raises a patina of sweat on my forehead. This body consciousness is a new thing for me. I normally ignore it except when I have an erection or the flu. But now I am becoming as attuned to my body as a camel driver to his camels, a cowboy to his horse, a lawyer to his BMW. Every twinge is a potential disaster. Did you know, Ellie slurs, did you know it takes 72 hours of lactic acid to settle in the muscles? I calculate we started walking 26 hours ago. At least 44 more hours of pain to anticipate. Thanks, Elle. No worries. Right now she is stumbling ahead of me, head down, legs and arms waving about like a crayfish, but everything else perfectly tuned. There's a chamois towel the size of a baby's fist attached to the side of a pack, maps of Spain tucked into a little flap, and a funky top that she bought yesterday on the way through Pamplona that says San Fermin 2004. Top of the range hiking boots and a headscarf complete the picture. She may look the goods, but she does not feel it. In fact, Ellie is seriously She is the colour of wall putty and acting very strangely, walking backwards down steep hills and talking about catching a tram to St Kilda. Her eyes are moving independently in her head. You could fry eggs on her forehead. She has only needed to stop for a pee once in the last half an hour, so by her normal standards she must also be seriously dehydrated. She's a tough girl and determined, so she keeps staggering on like a drunk out of a bar at closing time. But it's clear that she's not going to get much further. This is not looking good. We are only 2 days into the walk. Ellie gets a serious wobble on. We are edging along a cliff face. There is a sheer drop on one side, a stumble will see her over the edge, and my workload for the book immediately double. I wonder what I'd tell her mother if she takes a tumble. Stopping to ship a body home for burial will mean I may have to walk an extra 10 or 20 kilometres a day to finish on time. Perhaps I should just keep walking and let the foxes and the ants sort her out. Except she still owes me a beer from last night. An hour from Pamplona, she collapses against a wall, stiff as a bit of 2x4. I lie her out on the ground, legs raised on a backpack, while she mutters incoherently about going to a funky bar in Brunswick Street for brunch and a glass of red. Uh-oh. Victor, the Swedish Spaniard, offers to carry some of her pack. The hairdryer, the easel for painting watercolours, the 3 million muesli bars. Two Irish nurses stop and give Ellie their supply of rehydrating powder. After half an hour, I help Ellie stumble back onto her feet. We can't stay here. An Australian called Simon and a Spanish girl called Mercedes, pronounced Mercedes, stay with us the whole way to the next albergue. When we get to the outskirts of Pamplona, Mercedes negotiates with the hostelero of the albergue to let us into the dormitory 3 hours before it's officially open for the day. Ellie passes out on the bed, saying she'll buy the next round. Let's wait for 3/4 time. It's clear to me that the trip is over before it's begun. Ellie is stuffed. As soon as she's well enough, I'll put her on a plane back to Melbourne. There is a part of me that's relieved. I didn't really expect her to make it, and I didn't really expect to find my miracle. Yet my naive soul is still disappointed. I've spent the better part of the last 3 years travelling. The constant movement has become a welcome distraction from my life. Without something else to focus on, I am as restless as a caged animal. We all have things we don't like to face. With me, it's myself. Colin, a few unassuming reds. While Ellie is recuperating, I head into Pamplona for San Fermin. Take a look at the famous Feria festival before we head home. As I walk into Pamplona, there are graffiti and posters everywhere, written in Basque, for this is the heart of Basque country. Basque is an intimidating language with lots of K's and X's and Z's. A typical Basque slogan reads something like Kazakaliwaka. The ETA is Spain's IRA, a ruthless terrorist organisation that's been fighting for an independent Basque state for decades. But many Basques don't like them, and rich Basques despise and fear them because ETA kidnapped them for money. Most Basques I spoke to are quite happy with the autonomy they already have. Independence won't change anything. Most importantly, it won't make Atletico Bilbao play any better. But on the way into the city, I see a lot of ETA propaganda posters on the walls and light poles with pictures of young Basques currently in prison for heroically blowing up an unsuspecting policeman, plus a few women and children who happen to get in the way. Today, though, Pamplona is unconcerned with the ETA. This is the Feria. By the time I complete the long climb into the old city, it's going off like a frog in a sock. There are young men, white tunics torn, knees blooded, faces hollowed by the terrible things they have seen, staggering all over the square. And that's just from drinking. Wait until they run with the bulls tomorrow. San Fermin is a little bit about bulls and a lot about drinking. The bulls only run for 2 minutes every day. The drinking goes on for 23 hours and 58 minutes. An unassuming bottle of Tinto with the texture of chainsaw lubricant and a kick like aviation fuel costs just €3. The Feria is important to Spanish society. Mercedes has explained to me, because most sons stay at home until they marry, perhaps at 26 or 27. If they don't party on the street, they don't party at all. Any hour of the day or night during San Fermin, you will see people staggering around the plaza drinking Tinto out of clear plastic glasses the size of a plumber's bucket. There are buskers painted like gold cowboys or silver pirates, and Africans move about the crowd holding out trays of cheap sunglasses with more hope than expectation. There is no pitch. They just shove the tray in the middle of a conversation and wait for someone to tell them to and they do. Everyone has a red scarf, old women, babies, even a chihuahua. The square is packed with people, all kinds of people. Mothers kick footballs to their sons, punks vomit, babies fall asleep in prams, lovers smooch. 3 young Spaniards, reeling drunk, attach themselves to a mariachi band busking around the square. What has been a slow day so far for the crooners turns into a bonanza. The boys are a movable party. Soon a crowd of about 100 has gathered. Bottles are broken, middle-aged Spanish women tossed in the air. No insults are traded or punches thrown. These are hopeless, happy drunks. I like the Spanish, and I love San Fermin. Behind the square, the alleyways reek of urine and stale wine. There is more broken glass than spilled blood. I go into a bar and order a Tinto. This is my kind of pilgrimage. I remember thinking, I hope Ellie's all right. Half an hour later, I can't even remember who she is.